Selim was filled with disappointment, and his heart grew heavy at the comfortless emptiness of the box, when suddenly it seemed to him as though while he stared into it, the ivory box grew larger, or else he grew smaller. He wasn't certain which way it was, so that he no longer seemed to be holding it, but it was in the room before him, growing ever larger until he stood looking down into the opening as through a door. And while the box grew, so did the bare polished ivory inside change, and became at first a shadowy confusion of colour, which gradually grew to distinctness. And Selim saw before him, through the opening of the box, a garden with trees, flowers, and fountains. He fancied that he could even hear the water splashing in the alabaster basin of the nearest fountain, and a dove cooing restfully from the trees. As one in a dream, Selim saw all this, and then he stepped inside the box and found himself in the garden. The peacefulness of the palace enfolded him at once, and its beauty drew him on. Before he had taken 2 paces forward, Kasir was behind him. "Selim, dear friend, you have come at last." They embraced, and to Selim it did not seem strange that Kasir should be in the garden in the ivory box. Together they looked back into Selim's room, now shadowy in its turn and indistinct. "Do not close the lid behind you," warned Kasir, "or you will never be able to return to your world." Then they turned and walked through the garden. "You were a long time coming," said Kasir, "and though I longed to see you, I was glad that you were happy and didn't need to come." "I wasn't happy," said Selim. "At this moment that matters not." And indeed his cares now seemed as vague and insubstantial as his room behind him. For many hours they walked together in the garden, or sat beneath the trees, talking of all the things that they had talked of in the old days before Selim's marriage, and never a word passed between them of all the troubles which had come on them since their meeting with the witch. It was as though the unhappy things in their lives had never been. At last Kasir said, "It is time that you returned, or you will be missed. But you must come again if you are sad." Together they walked to the opening of the box, and once again Selim saw his room before him, shadowy and indistinct. He stepped out of the box, and once more he was in the room and could see all the familiar details of its furnishings, clear and substantial round him. He turned and saw that the opening into the garden was growing smaller, and he could no longer see his friend. Kasir's voice came to him from a great distance, very thin and faint. "Goodbye, Selim, goodbye." And in another moment he was looking into an empty ivory box in his hand. He closed the lid. It might all have been a dream, but the strange feeling of peace and comfort that had come to him, no dream of his had ever brought him such rest before. After that, Selim went often to the garden in the ivory box and talked with Kasir, and always he came away at peace and comforted, so that life didn't seem so sad to him as long as he had the ivory box. The years passed and Selim still prospered. He was not only the richest merchant, but also the richest man in the city, richer even than the Sultan, to whom he lent much money, and from whom he received many high offices. The people murmured against him, for he was too rich. The nobles hated him for his power, and in all the city he had no friend. But the witch laughed to herself, for her husband was now on the steps of the throne, and in a little while would he not be Sultan and her ambitions fulfilled? She had laid her plans carefully. The Sultan was to die as Kasir had died. His only son was but a boy, and as the most powerful man in the country, Selim would undoubtedly be chosen as regent. Then the boy would die as Kasir and his father had died, and there would be no choice for the city. Selim would be Sultan. So once again, with the help of her servant, the witch spent 3 nights preparing her magic, and on the 4th night she put her spell on the Sultan, who fell ill even as Kasir had. For many days he lay in the palace, visited by doctors not only from the city, but from other lands, all of whom pronounced his disease strange to them and incurable. All this time the witch waited impatiently in Selim's house for news of the Sultan's death. At last, unable to wait any longer, she sent her servant, in the form of a black pigeon, to the palace that she might learn the exact condition of the Sultan, but since all the doctors who attended him had been unable to name his malady, it was suspected at the palace that his sickness was due to witchcraft, and the guards had been instructed to allow no strange person or other living creature to approach the bedchamber where he lay. Thus, although the witch's servant was able to enter the room through a window, while the guard on the balcony was not looking, she did not think that to take any precautions before she left. When the guard saw the bird flying out through the window, he fitted an arrow to his bow and shot it as it flew, and it fell into the garden. He called down to the soldiers below to find it and pick it up, but when they reached the spot where it had fallen, they found instead a woman with an arrow in her breast. The servant knew she was dying, and filled with bitterness towards the witch whose ambition had caused her death. She betrayed her mistress before she died. When the word of this was brought to the Sultan, hope of recovery was restored to him, and he gave orders for the arrest of Selim and his wife. For although the servant had not mentioned his name, neither the Sultan nor anyone at the palace believed that Selim was not as guilty as his wife. When her servant didn't return, the witch feared that she had been discovered, and having made all the necessary preparations for her escape, she waited. As soon as the soldiers arrived at the house, she changed herself into a pigeon and flew from a window over the city to the forest outside the city walls. But she was unused to flying by day, since all of her previous adventures in the form of a bird had taken place at night. And confident at her escape from the guards, she didn't notice a hawk pursuing her until it was too late. She couldn't fly fast enough, and the hawk caught her, and thus ended the witch and all her wickedness in the very forest where Selim and Kasir had found her, years before. As soon as she was dead, the Sultan began to recover, and in a few hours he was completely cured, and lived for many years after. When the soldiers entered Selim's house, they found only Selim and his servants, and after a fruitless search for the witch, Selim alone was arrested of having endangered the Sultan's life by witchcraft, and the guards started back to the palace with their prisoner. Selim was horrified to learn the truth about his wife, and remembering Kasir's warning before his marriage, and his suspicions after, Selim didn't doubt her guilt for an instant. He knew, too, that no one would believe his own innocence, which he had no means of proving, and unpopular as he was with the people and the nobles, he could expect no mercy from the Sultan, who had trusted him, but knew he would surely die a disgraceful death. And so, on the way to the palace, at the first opportunity, Selim made a great effort, slipped from his guards, and ran down a narrow side street from where he turned into a dark alley between high walls. He could hear the soldiers running down the side street after him, but he hoped to lose them in the many narrow ways which turned out of one another in this part of the city. However, he had made a bad choice, for he had found the alley into which he had run was short, without any way leading from it, and it ended in a high wall with a locked gate. Selim knew he was trapped, and that all he could do was to wait until his guards turned into the alley and saw him. Then he remembered the ivory box. He took it from the folds of his robe, where he always carried it, opened it, and stepped in. Once more he was in the beautiful garden, and Kasir was by his side. "The palace guard is pursuing me," Selim gasped, "and if I am caught, I shall be slain. Help me." "Do you want to go back to that world, ever?" asked Kasir. "No, never," replied Selim. "Then let us close the lid of the box behind you." Together, they pulled down the ivory lid and shut out the world, and in that instant Selim forgot all that had gone before, no longer in part as on previous occasions in the box, but wholly and forever. The two friends smiled at one another and turned to the garden, and there, among the flowers and trees and the tinkling fountains, they walk and talk to this day. When the soldiers ran into the alley, they found it empty, save for a little carved ivory box, and they fancied that they had taken the wrong turning. One of them picked up the box, tried to open it. "It is locked," he said. He shook it, and because it sounded empty, he flung it from him over the high wall at the end of the alley, and it fell among some flowers on the other side.